The heart monitor's shrill beeping cut through the mansion's silence like a knife. Serafina Blackthorne rushed up the marble staircase, her worn sneakers squeaking against polished stone as Dr. Harrison's panicked voice echoed from the second floor. "She's seizing again. Get the lorazepam ready." 8-year-old Aspen Ravencrest lay rigid on her canopy bed, her small body convulsing as the 15th specialist in 6 months stood helplessly beside her. The child's eyes had rolled back, showing only white, while her father Thaddeus paced like a caged predator near the window. "Do something," he snarled at Dr. Harrison, his voice carrying the same cold authority that had built his billion-dollar empire. "You promised me this experimental treatment would work. Mr. Ravencrest, we're doing everything possible. The seizure should subside in." "Should?" Thaddeus spun around, his gray eyes blazing. "I didn't pay you $50,000 for should." Serafina pushed past the cluster of medical professionals surrounding the bed. She had been hired as night nurse only 3 days ago, desperate for the salary that would cover her sister Willow's cancer treatments. The other nurses whispered that no one lasted long in the Ravencrest household, but Serafina had nowhere else to turn. The child's lips were turning blue. "Her oxygen saturation is dropping," announced Dr. Chun, the neurologist flown in from Johns Hopkins. "We need to intubate." "No." The word escaped Serafina's lips before she could stop it. Every head in the room turned toward her. Dr. Harrison's eyebrows shot up in disbelief. "Excuse me." "The seizure pattern," Serafina said, moving closer to Aspen's bedside. "It's not epileptic. Look at her hands." Thaddeus stepped forward, his presence looming over her. "What are you talking about?" Serafina pointed to Aspen's clenched fists. "The way her fingers are curled, the specific muscle groups involved. This isn't a neurological disorder. It's heavy metal poisoning presenting as pseudo-seizures." Dr. Harrison scoffed. "Nurse Blackthorne, with all due respect, you're not qualified to." "My grandmother was Cherokee medicine woman," Serafina interrupted, ignoring the sharp intake of breath from the doctors. "She taught me to recognize toxicity patterns that modern medicine often misses." Aspen's been slowly poisoned with mercury. The room erupted in protests, but Thaddeus held up his hand for silence. His penetrating gaze fixed on Serafina. "You have 60 seconds to prove it, or you're fired." Serafina's heart hammered against her ribs, but she moved with practiced efficiency toward her nursing bag. She pulled out a small glass vial containing dried herbs she had prepared the night before, mixing them with bottled water from Aspen's nightstand. "What is that?" Dr. Chin demanded. "Cilantro, chlorella, and activated charcoal," Serafina replied, stirring the mixture. "Natural chelation therapy. If I'm right, this will bind to the mercury in her system and stop the pseudo-seizure within 1 minute." Dr. Harrison stepped forward. "Absolutely not. I won't allow you to give an unproven substance to my patient." "Your patient?" Thaddeus's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "This is my daughter, doctor. And in 6 months, your proven methods have accomplished nothing except watching her deteriorate." He looked at Serafina, and for a moment, she saw something crack in his armor. Fear. Desperation. "Do it." Serafina lifted Aspen's head gently and placed the mixture against her lips. The child's body continued to convulse, but Serafina spoke softly, using words her grandmother had taught her, words that carried healing intent. "Come back, little one. Come back to us." The seconds stretched like hours. Dr. Harrison checked his watch with obvious skepticism. The heart monitor continued its frantic beeping. Thaddeus stood motionless, his hands clenched at his sides. 55 seconds. 58 seconds. At exactly 1 minute, Aspen's body went still. The room held its collective breath. Then, slowly, the child's eyes fluttered open. Clear. Focused. Aware. "Daddy." Her voice was weak but unmistakably present. Dr. Harrison stumbled backward, his face pale. Dr. Chin fumbled for his stethoscope, pressing it against Aspen's chest with shaking hands. The heart monitor showed a normal, steady rhythm. "Impossible," Dr. Harrison whispered. Thaddeus dropped to his knees beside the bed, gathering his daughter into his arms. For a moment, the ruthless businessman vanished, replaced by a father who had nearly lost everything that mattered. "How did you know?" he asked Serafina, his voice hoarse. The symptoms were classic for mercury toxicity. The question is how she was exposed to it. Serafina met his gaze steadily. This wasn't accidental, Mr. Ravencrest. Someone has been poisoning your daughter. The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Harrison and Dr. Chun exchanged worried glances before quietly gathering their equipment and leaving. Within minutes, only Seraphina, Thaddeus, and Aspen remained in the room. Thaddeus's expression hardened as the implications sank in. Someone in his inner circle, someone with access to his home and his child, was trying to kill his daughter. "Pack your things," he told Seraphina. "You're moving into the guest wing tonight. From now on, you don't leave Aspen's side." "Mr. Ravencrest, 24-hour protection. Name your price." Seraphina thought of Willow's medical bills, of the eviction notice she'd hidden in her purse. 50,000 a month. Done. He stood, his businessman mask sliding back into place. "But understand this, Miss Blackthorne. If anything happens to my daughter while she's in your care, there won't be anywhere on earth you can hide from me." As threats went, it should have terrified her. Instead, Seraphina found herself studying the man who had just entrusted her with his most precious possession. There was something about Thaddeus Ravencrest that drew her in, despite every logical reason to run. She had just saved his daughter's life in 60 seconds. She had no idea she'd also sealed her own fate. 3 weeks into her new position, Seraphina discovered that living in the Ravencrest mansion was like being trapped inside a beautiful cage. Every corridor held secrets, every shadow concealed watching eyes, and every conversation seemed to die the moment she entered a room. The morning started like all the others since she had moved into the guest wing. Aspen bounced into the breakfast room at 7 sharp, her recovery nothing short of miraculous. The pale, sickly child who had nearly died from mercury poisoning had transformed into a vibrant 8-year-old with endless energy and an insatiable curiosity about everything around her. "Seraphina, look what I found in the library," Aspen said, clutching an old leather-bound book about Cherokee healing practices. "It has pictures of the plants your grandmother used." Seraphina smiled, accepting the book while scanning the room out of habit. Magnus Grimwald, Thaddeus's lawyer and closest friend, sat at the far end of the dining table, his pale eyes tracking her every movement. He had been present during most of her interactions with Thaddeus over the past weeks, always watching, always listening, always taking notes on his ever-present tablet. "That's wonderful, sweetie. We can read it together after your morning lessons. Mr. Grimwald says you're like a real medicine woman," Aspen continued, oblivious to the tension her words created. "He asked me lots of questions about how you made me better." Magnus set down his coffee cup with deliberate precision. "I was merely curious about Miss Blackthorne's methods. Such unconventional approaches deserve documentation, don't you think?" Before Seraphina could respond, Thaddeus entered the dining room, his presence immediately commanding attention. He wore a charcoal gray suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and carried himself with the confidence of a man accustomed to owning everything he surveyed. His dark hair was perfectly styled, but Seraphina noticed the exhaustion around his eyes that never quite disappeared. "Aspen, finish your breakfast. Your tutor will be here in 20 minutes. "But Daddy, I want to show Seraphina the music room. She promised to teach me one of her grandmother's songs." Thaddeus's gaze shifted to Seraphina, and she felt that familiar flutter in her stomach that had been growing stronger each day. There were moments when his guard dropped, usually when he was watching Aspen, where she glimpsed the man beneath the armor. Those moments left her more unsettled than his coldness ever could. "After lessons," he said firmly. "Miss Blackthorne has other responsibilities." The dismissal stung, but Seraphina had learned to hide her reactions. She had been hired to protect and care for Aspen, nothing more. The fact that she found herself increasingly drawn to the child's enigmatic father was a complication she couldn't afford. As Aspen reluctantly headed upstairs to meet her tutor, Magnus approached Seraphina with his characteristic calculating smile. "Miss Blackthorne, I wonder if you might have a moment to discuss some security protocols." She followed him into Thaddeus's study, a room dominated by floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a massive mahogany desk. Magnus gestured for her to sit in one of the leather chairs facing the desk while he remained standing, a subtle power play that wasn't lost on her. "I've been conducting background checks on all household staff," he began, consulting his tablet. "Standard procedure given recent events. Your credentials are impressive for someone from such humble beginnings." I worked hard for my nursing degree. Indeed. Though I must admit, I'm curious about the gap in your employment history 3 years ago. 6 months with no documented income or residence. Serafina's throat tightened. 3 years ago, Willow had been diagnosed with aggressive lymphoma. Serafina had exhausted her savings and taken unpaid leave to care for her sister during the worst of the chemotherapy treatments. They had lived in their car for 2 months before finding a women's shelter that would take them both. I was caring for a sick family member. Magnus nodded as if her answer confirmed something he had already suspected. Family loyalty is admirable, though it does raise questions about your motivation for accepting this position. The salary Mr. Ravencrest offered you is quite generous. Life-changing, one might say. Are you suggesting I have ulterior motives? I'm suggesting that desperate people sometimes make desperate choices. And you, Miss Blackthorne, strike me as someone who has been desperate for quite some time. The accusation hung in the air between them like a blade. Before Serafina could respond, Thaddeus appeared in the doorway, his expression thunderous. Magnus, what exactly are you doing? Simply conducting due diligence on our newest employee. Given that someone attempted to murder your daughter, I thought it prudent to examine everyone with access to this house. Thaddeus stepped into the room, his presence immediately shifting the dynamic. Miss Blackthorne saved Aspen's life when 15 medical experts failed. That earns her my trust. Trust is a luxury we can't afford, Magnus replied smoothly. Not when Aspen's safety is at stake. You're right, Thaddeus said, his voice deadly quiet. Which is why you'll cease these interrogations immediately. Miss Blackthorne is under my protection. The word protection sent an unexpected shiver down Serafina's spine. Magnus' jaw tightened almost imperceptibly before he nodded and gathered his tablet. Of course, I was simply being thorough. After Magnus left, Thaddeus moved to the window overlooking the estate grounds. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken tension. He means well, Thaddeus said finally. Magnus has been my friend since college. He's protective of this family. He thinks I'm after your money. Thaddeus turned to face her, and for a moment, his carefully constructed mask slipped entirely. Are you? The question should have offended her. Instead, she found herself studying the vulnerability in his gray eyes, the way his shoulders carried the weight of constant vigilance. I needed the job, she said honestly. My sister is fighting cancer. The treatments are expensive, and insurance doesn't cover everything. So yes, I need the money. But I would never hurt Aspen to get it. Something shifted in his expression, a recognition of shared desperation. How old is your sister? 22. She's in remission now, but the follow-up care costs more than I make in 6 months. Thaddeus was quiet for a long moment, processing her words. When he spoke again, his voice was softer than she had ever heard it. I'll have my accountant set up a medical account for her treatments. Consider it part of your compensation package. The offer was so unexpected, so generous, that Serafina felt tears prick at her eyes. Mr. Ravencrest, I can't accept. You can't and you will. Aspen is alive because of you. This family owes you a debt that can't be repaid with a simple salary. The way he said family sent warmth flooding through her chest. For the first time since accepting this position, Serafina allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, she had found more than just a job in this strange, beautiful prison. She had no idea that hope would nearly destroy them both. The antique Steinway grand piano dominated the music room like a sleeping giant, its ebony surface reflecting the late afternoon sunlight streaming through tall windows. Serafina had avoided this room for weeks, knowing that music would only remind her of everything she had lost when her grandmother died. But Aspen's persistent requests had finally worn down her resistance. Play something happy, Aspen said, settling beside Serafina on the velvet bench. Something that makes you think of good things. Serafina's fingers found the keys instinctively, picking out a gentle melody her grandmother had taught her years ago. The notes filled the room with warmth, and she felt some of the constant tension in her shoulders begin to ease. Aspen hummed along, her clear voice harmonizing perfectly with the simple tune. That's beautiful. Did your grandmother write it? She learned it from her grandmother, who learned it from hers. Cherokee music doesn't belong to just one person. It belongs to everyone who needs healing. As the last notes faded, Aspen slid off the bench and knelt beside it, running her small hands along the carved wooden panels underneath. "There's something loose here," she said, pressing against a section that shifted slightly under her touch. "Careful, sweetie. That piano is probably worth more than most people's houses." But Aspen had already managed to work the panel free, revealing a hidden compartment filled with yellowed sheet music. The papers were bound with a faded ribbon, and when Serafina carefully lifted them out, she noticed immediately that they weren't ordinary compositions. The musical notations were standard, but scattered throughout the measures were tiny symbols that had nothing to do with music. Numbers, letters, even small drawings that looked almost like Cherokee pictographs. Her grandmother had taught her enough about codes to recognize when she was looking at one. "What do those marks mean?" Aspen asked, peering over Serafina's shoulder. "I'm not sure yet, but someone went to a lot of trouble to hide these." The sound of footsteps in the hallway made Serafina quickly gather the sheets and tuck them into her jacket. Whatever secrets these compositions held, she needed time to study them properly before anyone else knew they existed. Thaddeus appeared in the doorway, still wearing his business suit, but with his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up. The small change in his appearance somehow made him look more approachable, more human. "I heard music," he said, his gaze shifting between Serafina and Aspen. "I haven't heard anyone play that piano in years." "Serafina knows lots of songs," Aspen announced. "Beautiful ones that her grandmother taught her. And we found some old music hidden in the bench." Thaddeus's expression sharpened. "What kind of music?" Serafina forced herself to remain calm. "Just some classical pieces. Nothing important." He studied her face for a moment, and she had the uncomfortable feeling that he could see right through her lie. But before he could press further, Serafina's phone rang. Willow's ringtone. "I need to take this," she said, stepping toward the window for privacy. "Sarah?" Willow's voice was weak, barely audible over the phone. "I'm at the emergency room. The doctors think the cancer might be back." The world tilted sideways. Serafina gripped the window frame, trying to keep her voice steady. "What are you talking about? You just had your 6-month checkup." Everything was clear. New symptoms started yesterday. Severe fatigue, night sweats, swollen lymph nodes. Dr. Martinez wants to run more tests, but insurance is fighting the authorization. They're saying it's too soon for another full workup. Serafina closed her eyes, feeling the familiar panic that came with every setback in Willow's treatment. Even with Thaddeus's generous salary, the medical bills from her sister's initial treatment had left them drowning in debt. Another round of cancer treatments would destroy them financially, even with the medical account he had established. "How much?" she whispered. "The preliminary tests alone will cost $15,000. If it's a relapse, we're looking at another $150,000 minimum." The phone slipped from Serafina's numb fingers, clattering against the hardwood floor. The numbers echoed in her head like a death sentence. Even with her new job, even with Thaddeus's help, it wouldn't be enough. It would never be enough. She didn't realize she was crying until a warm hand touched her shoulder. Thaddeus stood behind her, his presence solid and reassuring in a world that suddenly felt like it was crumbling apart. "What's wrong?" "My sister." The words came out broken, barely coherent. "The cancer might be back. I can't lose her, Mr. Ravencrest. She's all I have left." Without thinking, she turned into his embrace, and suddenly his arms were around her, holding her against his chest while she sobbed out months of accumulated fear and exhaustion. He smelled like expensive cologne and something uniquely male that made her feel safe for the first time in years. "We'll figure it out," he murmured against her hair. "Whatever it costs, whatever she needs, we'll figure it out." The kindness in his voice only made her cry harder. When had anyone ever offered to help carry her burdens without asking for something in return? When had anyone ever held her while she fell apart and made her feel like she wasn't facing the world alone? She pulled back to look at him, intending to thank him, to apologize for breaking down so completely. But the expression on his face stopped her cold. The careful control he maintained was gone, replaced by something raw and hungry that made her breath catch. "Serafina," he said, her name a whisper on his lips. She should have stepped away, should have remembered that he was her employer, that crossing this line would complicate everything. Instead, she found herself reaching up to touch his face, feeling the slight roughness of stubble against her palm. He caught her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. For a moment, they stood frozen, balanced on the edge of a decision that would change everything between them. Then he kissed her, It wasn't gentle or tentative. It was desperate, consuming, full of months of unspoken tension and carefully buried desire. She kissed him back with equal fervor, pouring all her gratitude and longing and hope into the connection between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, reality crashed back down around them. Aspen was still in the room, now sitting at the piano bench and pretending to study the sheet music with intense concentration, though her barely contained grin suggested she had witnessed everything. More importantly, Magnus Grimwald stood in the doorway, his pale eyes taking in every detail of the scene before him. His expression was carefully neutral, but Serafina caught the flash of something calculating in his gaze before he schooled his features. "Forgive the interruption," Magnus said smoothly. "I was looking for you, Thaddeus. We need to discuss the Morrison contract before tomorrow's board meeting." Thaddeus stepped away from Serafina, his professional mask sliding back into place with practiced ease. But she could see the regret in his eyes, the knowledge that whatever had just happened between them couldn't be undone. "Of course," Thaddeus replied. "Give me 5 minutes." After Magnus left, an awkward silence filled the room. Aspen continued her examination of the sheet music, humming softly to herself, while Serafina and Thaddeus carefully avoided each other's eyes. "About what just happened," Thaddeus began. "It was a mistake," Serafina said quickly. "You were being kind, and I was emotional. It won't happen again." But even as she said the words, she knew they were a lie. Whatever had ignited between them wasn't going away, no matter how much common sense demanded it should. The hidden sheet music crinkled inside her jacket, reminding her that some secrets were worth keeping, even from the people we cared about most. The laboratory report trembled in Serafina's hands as she read the results for the 3rd time. The blood samples she had secretly taken from Aspen during routine medical checks told a story that made her stomach churn with horror. Mercury levels that should have been undetectable were present in concentrations that would have been lethal within another month. But more damning than the numbers was the pattern of exposure. The mercury hadn't accumulated gradually through environmental contamination. Someone had been administering precise doses over an extended period, carefully calculated to cause neurological damage while avoiding immediate death. Someone had been systematically poisoning an 8-year-old child. Serafina's phone buzzed with a text from Thaddeus. "Meet me in the conservatory. 10 minutes. Their secret meetings had become a dangerous addiction over the past 2 weeks. Stolen moments in empty corridors, heated kisses in dark alcoves, whispered conversations that revealed more about each other than either had intended. Each encounter left her more entangled in feelings she couldn't afford to have, yet she couldn't bring herself to stop. She tucked the lab report into her jacket pocket, next to the decoded sheet music that had kept her awake for 3 nights. The Cherokee pictographs her grandmother had taught her to read had unlocked the first layer of the code, revealing GPS coordinates that pointed somewhere on the Ravencrest estate grounds. The conservatory was empty when she arrived, moonlight streaming through the glass ceiling to illuminate rows of exotic orchids and rare flowering plants. Thaddeus emerged from behind a cluster of towering bamboo, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar and his hair slightly disheveled from running his hands through it. "We need to talk," she said, but her resolve wavered when he pulled her into his arms without preamble. His mouth found hers with desperate urgency, and for a moment she forgot everything except the feel of his hands tangling in her hair and the way he whispered her name like a prayer. 3 weeks of careful boundaries had crumbled completely, leaving them both raw and wanting. "I can't stop thinking about you," he murmured against her throat. "It's driving me insane." "Thaddeus, there's something you need to know about Aspen's condition." He pulled back to look at her, concern replacing desire in his gray eyes. "What about it?" "She's been completely healthy since you started the chelation therapy." Serafina extracted the lab report from her jacket, her hands shaking slightly as she handed it to him. "I've been monitoring her mercury levels. Someone has been poisoning her deliberately. The pattern of exposure proves it wasn't accidental." Thaddeus scanned the document, his expression growing darker with each line. When he finished reading, he looked up at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Where did you get this?" "These aren't from her regular medical checkups. I took blood samples during routine care and had them analyzed privately. I needed to be certain before making accusations." "Accusations against whom?" "My household staff." People who have worked for this family for years. The cold edge in his voice made her step backward. Someone with regular access to Aspen's food or medication. Someone who understands dosing and timing. Someone like a nurse, perhaps? The words hit her like a physical blow. You think I poisoned her? I think you showed up at the exact moment my daughter needed saving, armed with knowledge that 15 specialists didn't possess. I think you've been conducting unauthorized medical tests on her. And now you're presenting me with evidence that conveniently points away from yourself. Serafina felt her world tilting off its axis. I saved her life. Or you created a problem you could solve, ensuring job security and access to my family. Magnus was right to be suspicious. Magnus. Understanding crashed over her like ice water. You discussed this with Magnus? Thaddeus's silence was answer enough. Serafina backed toward the conservatory door, her chest tight with betrayal and humiliation. He's been feeding you lies about me, hasn't he? Planting seeds of doubt, making you question my motives. Magnus has protected this family for 20 years. He has no reason to lie. And I do? What exactly do you think my endgame is here, Thaddeus? Seduce you for your money? Kill your daughter for some imaginary inheritance? I don't know what to think anymore. His voice was raw with frustration. 3 weeks ago, you were a stranger. Now you're claiming someone in my inner circle is trying to murder my child, asking me to suspect people I've trusted for decades. Look at the evidence. Evidence you collected in secret, using methods that could be easily fabricated. How do I know these results are even real? The accusation shattered something inside her chest. After everything they had shared, all the moments of vulnerability and connection, he still saw her as a potential threat to be managed rather than someone trying to protect his daughter. You're right, she said quietly. You don't know me at all. She walked away from him, each step feeling like a small death. Behind her, she heard him call her name, but she didn't turn back. Whatever fragile trust had been building between them was gone, poisoned as surely as Aspen had been. In her room, Serafina packed her few belongings with mechanical precision while her mind raced. The lab results were real, which meant someone in the Ravencrest household was still a threat to Aspen. Even if Thaddeus no longer trusted her, she couldn't leave the child in danger. She pulled out the decoded sheet music, studying the coordinates one more time. The location appeared to be somewhere in the estate's extensive gardens, possibly near the old family cemetery she had glimpsed during her walks with Aspen. If she was leaving anyway, she had nothing to lose by investigating. The night air was crisp against her skin as she made her way across the grounds, using her phone's GPS to navigate toward the coordinates. The path led her through formal gardens and past ornate fountains before ending at a wrought iron gate that marked the entrance to the Ravencrest family cemetery. Moonlight illuminated weathered headstones and elaborate monuments, but the coordinates pointed beyond them to a mausoleum that seemed newer than the rest. Unlike the other structures, this one showed signs of recent maintenance, with fresh flowers placed beside its entrance. The name carved above the door made her breath catch. Edmund Ravencrest, beloved brother and son, taken too soon. Thaddeus's older brother, dead for 18 years. The same brother mentioned in the hidden musical codes. Using her phone's flashlight, Serafina examined the mausoleum more closely. Behind a loose stone near the foundation, her fingers found what felt like a hidden compartment. Inside was a waterproof container holding documents that would change everything she thought she knew about the Ravencrest family. And about herself. As she read through yellowed marriage certificates, birth records, and love letters written in her mother's distinctive handwriting, one devastating truth became clear. Aspen wasn't the only Ravencrest in danger. She was. The sound of footsteps on gravel made her look up sharply. Magnus Grimwald stood 20 feet away, no longer bothering to hide the malice in his pale eyes. I was wondering when you'd find your way here, he said, pulling out a gun with casual efficiency. Though I must admit, I expected it to take a bit longer. You're more resourceful than I anticipated. Serafina clutched the documents against her chest, her mind racing through escape options. You're the one who poisoned Aspen. Guilty as charged. Though in my defense, it was nothing personal. The child was simply an obstacle to be removed, much like you've become. Thaddeus will figure out the truth. Magnus laughed, the sound echoing eerily among the headstones. Thaddeus believes exactly what I've told him to believe. That you're a gold-digging nurse who fabricated evidence to make yourself indispensable. By tomorrow, you'll have disappeared entirely, just another unstable employee who couldn't handle the pressure. He raised the gun, and Serafina realized that all her careful plans, all her hopes for the future, were about to end in a cemetery surrounded by the bones of people whose secrets had died with them. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was about to join a family she had never known she belonged to. The gun barrel glinted in the moonlight as Magnus stepped closer, his polished shoes crunching against the gravel path. Serafina's fingers tightened around the documents, her grandmother's teachings about survival flooding back. Never show fear. Always look for an escape route. Fight only when cornered with no other options. You seem confused, my dear, Magnus said, his cultured voice taking on a mocking tone. Perhaps I should clarify a few things before we conclude our business. Those papers you're clutching so desperately contain quite the family tree, don't they? Serafina's mind raced as she processed what she had read in those yellow documents. Birth certificate for Serafina Blackthorne, born Serafina Ravencrest. Father listed as Edmund Ravencrest. Mother, Ayanna Blackthorne, nurse at Portland General Hospital. Marriage certificate dated 8 months before her birth, signed by both parents in a small ceremony witnessed by a Cherokee elder. Edmund was your father, Magnus continued, circling her like a predator. Quite the romantic, actually. Fell head over heels for a Cherokee nurse who was treating him after a polo accident. Married her in secret, much to the family's horror. Old money doesn't mix with indigenous blood, you understand. That makes me the rightful heir, Serafina said, her voice steadier than she felt. Not you. Magnus' laugh was sharp and bitter. Precisely the problem. When Edmund died in that convenient car accident 18 years ago, everyone assumed the Ravencrest line would continue through dear Thaddeus. But then I discovered those pesky marriage documents hidden in Edmund's effects, along with evidence that he had a child. So you killed my mother. Ayanna was inconveniently protective of you. She threatened to expose Edmund's death as murder unless I guaranteed your safety. Such a noble gesture, really. She died believing her sacrifice would protect you. The casual way he discussed her mother's murder made Serafina's blood boil. Ayanna Blackthorne had died when Serafina was 8 years old, supposedly in a random mugging gone wrong. She had spent her childhood believing her father abandoned them, never knowing he had been murdered before she was old enough to remember him. But why wait 18 years? Why not kill me as a child? Because you vanished into the foster system under your mother's maiden name. It took me nearly 2 decades to locate you, and even then, I only found you because of a remarkable stroke of luck. Magnus pulled out his phone, showing her a photograph of the genetic analysis report he had run after she cured Aspen. Modern DNA testing is quite remarkable. When you saved little Aspen with such unconventional methods, I had your blood tested from medical supplies you handled. Imagine my surprise when the results showed Ravencrest genetic markers. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. You've been planning this whole time. Planning, adapting, improvising as needed. Originally, I intended to eliminate Aspen first, then arrange a tragic accident for Thaddeus. A grieving father, devastated by the loss of his only child, takes his own life. Such a touching story. But then you appeared and ruined everything by actually curing the girl. The mercury poisoning was meant to be fatal. Eventually, yes. Slow enough to avoid suspicion, fast enough to ensure the child wouldn't live to inherit anything. But your interference forced me to accelerate my timeline considerably. He gestured with the gun toward the mausoleum. This seemed like poetic justice. Edmund's daughter joining him in the family crypt, just as Ayanna joined him in death all those years ago. Serafina edged backward, calculating distances and angles. The cemetery was surrounded by a low stone wall, but reaching it would require getting past Magnus. Her phone was in her jacket pocket, but she doubted she could call for help before he pulled the trigger. Thaddeus will figure out the truth eventually, she said, trying to buy time. Will he? The man who just accused you of fabricating evidence against his household staff? I've spent months carefully poisoning his opinion of you, my dear. By the time your body is discovered, he'll believe you were nothing more than a disturbed woman who couldn't handle being rejected. He won't believe I killed myself. No, but he'll believe you tried to blackmail him with forged documents claiming to prove you're Edmund's daughter. When that failed, You became violent and threatened his family. I, of course, was forced to defend myself." Magnus smiled with genuine pleasure. Self-defense is such a convenient legal doctrine. The sound of an engine in the distance made both of them freeze. Headlights swept across the cemetery gates as a vehicle approached along the main estate road. Magnus cursed under his breath, his careful composure cracking for the first time. "It seems we'll need to conclude this more quickly than planned," he said, raising the gun with renewed purpose. Serafina dove behind the nearest headstone as the gun fired, the bullet chipping stone inches from her head. She rolled to her feet and sprinted toward the cemetery wall, zigzagging between monuments as Magnus fired again. The headlights were getting closer, accompanied by the sound of multiple vehicles moving fast across the estate grounds. Someone was coming, but would they arrive in time? A third gunshot rang out, and this time Serafina felt the bullet graze her shoulder, spinning her around and sending her crashing into an ornate marble angel. Pain exploded through her arm as she struggled to regain her footing. Magnus approached slowly, confident now that she was wounded and trapped against the cemetery wall. "You know, in another life, I might have actually liked you. You have spirit, intelligence, compassion, all admirable qualities in someone who wasn't standing between me and $1 billion inheritance." The vehicles were close enough now that she could hear multiple doors slamming and voices shouting orders. Magnus heard them too, his expression shifting from satisfaction to panic as he realized his carefully orchestrated plan was falling apart. "Time's up," he snarled, taking aim for the final shot. Serafina closed her eyes and thought of Aspen, hoping the little girl would be safe from whatever happened next. She thought of Thaddeus, wishing she could have convinced him to trust her. She thought of Willow, praying her sister would survive without her. The gunshot echoed through the cemetery, but the pain never came. When she opened her eyes, Thaddeus stood 10 feet away, smoking gun in his hand and fury blazing in his gray eyes. Magnus lay motionless beside Edmund's mausoleum, blood pooling beneath his still form. "Are you hurt?" Thaddeus asked, dropping his weapon and rushing to her side. Serafina could only stare at him in shock. "How did you know?" "Aspen." She overheard Magnus making phone calls about eliminating threats to the family inheritance. "Smart girl hid and recorded everything on her tablet before finding me." He gently examined her wounded shoulder, his touch infinitely careful. "I'm so sorry I didn't believe you. Magnus has been manipulating me for years, and I was too blind to see it." Police sirens wailed in the distance as Thaddeus helped her to her feet. "There's something else you need to know," she said, holding up the documents she had managed to keep clutched in her uninjured hand. He read through them quickly, his expression shifting from confusion to amazement to something that looked almost like joy. "You're Edmund's daughter. Your family." The word family hit her like a physical embrace. After 26 years of believing she was alone in the world except for Willow, she had found a place where she belonged. "Does this change things between us?" she asked, suddenly uncertain. Thaddeus pulled her carefully into his arms, mindful of her injury. "It changes everything, and nothing at all." As the police and paramedics swarmed the cemetery, Serafina allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she had finally found her way home. The fluorescent lights of Portland General Hospital's emergency room cast harsh shadows across Thaddeus's face as he paced the waiting area for the 4th hour. Blood from Serafina's shoulder wound had stained his white dress shirt, but he refused to leave long enough to change clothes. Every few minutes, he glanced toward the trauma bay doors, willing them to open with news about her condition. Detective Sarah Chun approached with a steaming cup of coffee and a tablet full of questions that couldn't wait for morning. The police had been surprisingly efficient in processing the crime scene, though Thaddeus suspected his family name had expedited certain procedures. "Mr. Ravencrest, I need to go over your statement one more time," Detective Chin said, settling into the uncomfortable plastic chair beside him. "You said Aspen overheard Mr. Grimwald making phone calls about eliminating threats to your family inheritance?" Thaddeus nodded, pulling out his daughter's tablet and queuing up the recording that had saved Serafina's life. His hand still shook slightly when he thought about how close he had come to losing both of them. "Play it again," he said, though hearing Magnus' voice still made his stomach churn with betrayal and rage. The recording began with Aspen's whispered explanation of why she was hiding in the study closet, followed by Magnus' unmistakable voice speaking to someone on the phone. The Cherokee nurse has become a significant problem. She's discovered the mercury poisoning and obtained genetic testing that proves her parentage. We need to accelerate the timeline immediately. There was a pause, presumably while the other party responded. Then Magnus continued. Yes, I understand the risks. But if Thaddeus discovers that his brother was murdered and that I've been systematically eliminating potential heirs for 2 decades, I'll lose everything. The girl needs to disappear tonight, and it needs to look like an accident. Detective Chin stopped the recording. Do we know who he was talking to? Dr. Harrison. Thaddeus replied grimly. The specialist who had been treating Aspen before Serafina arrived. Magnus paid him to misdiagnose the mercury poisoning as a rare neurological condition, ensuring that traditional treatments would fail and Aspen would eventually die. The conspiracy had unraveled quickly once police began investigating Magnus' financial records. Dr. Harrison had broken within hours of being arrested, confessing to falsifying medical reports and accepting bribes to keep Aspen sick. 3 other household staff members had been on Magnus' payroll, reporting Serafina's daily activities and helping him monitor potential threats to his plan. What I still don't understand, Detective Chin said, is why Mr. Grimwald waited 18 years to eliminate Miss Blackthorne. If he knew about her existence when her mother died, why not kill her then? Thaddeus had been wrestling with the same question, because he didn't know about her. When Edmund died, Magnus destroyed most of his personal effects to hide evidence of the murder, but he missed the safety deposit box where Edmund kept his marriage certificate and other documents proving Serafina's legitimacy. Magnus only discovered those papers after Edmund's death, and by then, Iana had already fled with Serafina and changed their names. So he killed the mother to prevent her from claiming inheritance rights for her daughter, and spent the next 18 years searching for a child who had vanished into the foster system. He only found her because of the genetic testing he ordered after she cured Aspen. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Serafina's own compassion and medical skill had led directly to her nearly being murdered by the man who had orchestrated her parents' deaths. Dr. Martinez emerged from the trauma bay, pulling off blood-stained gloves as he approached. Thaddeus shot to his feet, his heart hammering against his ribs. How is she? Lucky. The bullet passed clean through her shoulder without hitting any major arteries or nerves. She'll need physical therapy, but there shouldn't be any permanent damage. Dr. Martinez glanced at Detective Chun before continuing. However, I'm more concerned about her emotional state. She's been asking for her sister repeatedly, and when I told her visiting hours don't start until 8, she became quite agitated. Thaddeus checked his watch. It was nearly 6 in the morning, which meant Willow was probably preparing for another day of chemotherapy treatments at the cancer center across town. I'll handle it, he said. Can I see her now? Dr. Martinez nodded toward the recovery room. 5 minutes. She's exhausted and needs rest. Serafina looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, her dark hair spread across white pillows and her left arm immobilized in a sling. But her eyes were alert when he entered, and she managed a weak smile that made his chest tight with relief. You came back, she said softly. I never left. He pulled a chair close to her bedside, careful not to jostle any of the medical equipment. How are you feeling? Like I've been shot by my boyfriend's psychotic best friend. She paused, studying his expression. Ex-best friend, I assume? Magnus is dead, Serafina. He can't hurt you or Aspen ever again. Something in his voice made her reach for his hand with her uninjured arm. You killed him. It wasn't a question, and Thaddeus didn't try to deny it. When I saw him pointing that gun at you, I didn't think. I just reacted. He was going to murder the woman I love, and I couldn't let that happen. The words hung between them, more honest than anything he had ever said. Serafina's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling through them. You love me. Desperately. Completely. In ways that probably aren't healthy or rational. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss against her knuckles. I know the timing is terrible, and we have 100 complications to work through, but I love you too, she interrupted. Even when you accused me of being a gold digger and fabricating evidence against your household staff. I'm so sorry about that. Magnus had been manipulating my perception of you for weeks, and I was too proud to admit I might be wrong. Serafina shifted carefully to make room on the narrow bed. Come here. He stretched out beside her, mindful of her injuries, and pulled her gently against his chest. For the first time in months, the constant tension in his shoulders began to ease. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we heal. Both of us. We figure out how to be a family with Aspen, how to honor Edmund's memory, how to make sure Magnus' crimes don't destroy everything good that's come from this nightmare. And Willow, I've already arranged for the best oncologists in the country to consult on her case. Whatever she needs, wherever she needs to go for treatment, we'll make it happen." Serafina tilted her head to look at him. You're stuck with me now, Cherokee medicine woman. For better or worse, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. Is that a proposal? Thaddeus smiled, feeling lighter than he had in years. It's a promise. The proposal comes later, when you're not in a hospital bed recovering from a gunshot wound. Outside the recovery room window, dawn was breaking over Portland, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. After 18 years of living with the truth of his brother's murder buried beneath Magnus' lies, Thaddeus finally felt like he could breathe freely. The kingdom Magnus had tried to steal for himself was falling, but something better was rising from its ashes. Something real, built on love instead of greed, trust instead of manipulation, and the kind of healing that came from finally confronting the truth. 2 days after the shooting, Serafina's shoulder infection spiked a fever that sent her back into surgery. Thaddeus had been dozing in the uncomfortable hospital chair when alarms began shrieking from her room, jolting him awake to find nurses rushing past him with crash carts and emergency medications. Dr. Martinez emerged from the operating room 4 hours later, his scrubs stained with sweat and his expression grim. "The bullet fragments we missed initially caused more damage than we initially realized. There was internal bleeding and signs of sepsis. We've cleaned out the infected tissue, but the next 24 hours will be critical." Thaddeus stared through the ICU window at Serafina's unconscious form, her face pale against the white sheets and her body connected to more machines than he could count. Aspen pressed against his side, her small hand clutching his with desperate strength. "Is she going to die like Mommy did?" Aspen whispered, voicing the fear that had been clawing at Thaddeus's chest since the monitors first started screaming. "No," he said firmly, though uncertainty gnawed at him. "Serafina is strong. She's going to fight this and come back to us." But as the hours stretched into evening, Serafina's condition continued to deteriorate. Her fever climbed despite aggressive antibiotic treatment, and her blood pressure dropped to levels that made the medical team exchange worried glances. At midnight, Dr. Martinez pulled Thaddeus aside for a conversation that felt like stepping into his worst nightmare. "We're doing everything we can, but I need you to understand the severity of her condition. The infection has spread to her bloodstream. Without significant improvement in the next few hours, we may be looking at organ failure." The words hit Thaddeus like physical blows. After surviving Magnus' murder attempt, after finally admitting their feelings for each other, Serafina might be taken from him by something as mundane as a hospital-acquired infection. What about experimental treatments? Specialists from other hospitals? Money is no object. Mr. Ravencrest, this isn't about money. Sometimes the human body simply reaches its limits. Thaddeus refused to accept that answer. Within an hour, he had medical consultants flying in from Johns Hopkins, Mayo Clinic, and Harvard Medical. If conventional treatment wasn't enough, he would find someone who thought beyond conventional boundaries. Dr. Elena Vasquez arrived from Stanford at 3 in the morning, bringing with her a briefcase full of experimental immunotherapy treatments that weren't yet approved for general use. After reviewing Serafina's case, she recommended a combination of targeted antibiotics and immune system boosters that might give her body the strength to fight off the infection. "The treatment is risky," Dr. Vasquez warned. "But given her current trajectory, the alternative is worse." Thaddeus signed the consent forms without hesitation. While doctors worked to save Serafina's life, another crisis was developing across town. Willow's emergency room visit had confirmed their worst fears. Her cancer had returned with aggressive vengeance, spreading to multiple organs in the weeks since her last clear scan. Dr. Sarah Kim, the oncologist Thaddeus had flown in from Sloan Kettering, delivered the diagnosis with clinical precision that didn't soften its devastating impact. "The cancer is stage 4, metastatic, and moving fast. Without immediate intervention, we're looking at weeks, not months." Thaddeus sat in the hospital conference room, feeling like he was drowning in medical terminology and impossible decisions. Serafina was fighting for her life in the ICU while her sister was dying of cancer 20 miles away, and he was the only one in position to make choices for both of them. What are the treatment options? Experimental immunotherapy combined with targeted chemotherapy. There's a clinical trial starting next week at our New York facility that might be her best chance. But I need to be honest about the odds. Tell me, 15% survival rate at 5 years. The treatment itself might kill her faster than the cancer would. Thaddeus closed his eyes, thinking about what Serafina would want him to do. She had spent years sacrificing everything for Willow's medical care, working multiple jobs, and going without necessities to afford treatments. There was no question what her choice would be. Set up the transfer to New York. Whatever it costs, whatever she needs, make it happen. By morning, Willow was on a private medical jet to Sloan Kettering, accompanied by a team of specialists and nurses who would provide round-the-clock care during her treatment. Thaddeus had liquidated assets worth $20 million in 12 hours to fund both sisters' medical care, but the money felt meaningless compared to the possibility of losing either of them. Aspen had spent the night curled up in the hospital waiting room, refusing to leave despite Thaddeus's attempts to convince her to go home. She clutched the decoded sheet music they had found in the piano bench, humming the melodies softly to herself while tears tracked down her cheeks. "Daddy, I keep thinking about the songs Serafina taught me," she said, looking up at him with eyes too old for her 8 years. "The ones her grandmother said could heal people. Do you think if I play them for her, she might wake up?" The request broke something inside Thaddeus's chest. "I think Serafina would love to hear your music, sweetheart." He arranged for a portable keyboard to be brought to the ICU, bending hospital rules through a combination of influence and generous donations to the hospital's children's wing. As Aspen played the Cherokee healing songs Serafina had taught her, something remarkable happened. Serafina's fever broke. Her blood pressure stabilized. The monitors that had been screaming warnings for 18 hours began showing normal readings. Dr. Vasquez called it a medical miracle, attributing the improvement to the experimental treatment protocol. Thaddeus preferred to believe in the healing power of music and love. When Serafina's eyes finally fluttered open, the first thing she saw was Aspen's tear-stained face bent over the keyboard, fingers dancing across keys worn smooth by generations of healing songs. "Did I miss the concert?" Serafina asked weakly, her voice barely above a whisper. Thaddeus laughed through his tears, capturing her hand and bringing it to his lips. "Just the opening act. The real performance starts now. Willow, on her way to the best cancer treatment center in the country. She's going to fight this, and she's going to win." Serafina smiled, the expression transforming her pale face. "We all are." As Aspen continued playing her grandmother's healing songs, Thaddeus made a silent promise to the woman who had saved his daughter's life and stolen his heart. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever obstacles they faced as a family, they would face them together. The music filled the ICU with hope, drowning out the mechanical sounds of medical equipment and replacing them with something infinitely more powerful. The sound of a family choosing love over fear, healing over hatred, and hope over despair. For the first time since Magnus' betrayal had shattered his world, Thaddeus felt like they might actually survive this intact. 6 months later, the Ravencrest Estate Gardens had been transformed into something that looked like it belonged in a fairy tale. White roses climbed wooden arbors that framed the ceremony space, their petals scattered across the grass by a gentle October breeze. The setting sun cast everything in golden light, making the mansion's windows gleam like jewels against the backdrop of autumn foliage. Serafina stood before an antique mirror in the bridal suite, hardly recognizing the woman staring back at her. The simple white dress she wore had belonged to Ayanna, carefully preserved in cedar and discovered among Edmund's hidden belongings. It fit perfectly, as if her mother had known this day would come. "You look exactly like her," Willow said softly, adjusting the Cherokee beadwork that served as Serafina's something borrowed. Her sister's hair had grown back thick and dark after her successful treatment at Sloan Kettering, and the healthy glow in her cheeks made her look younger than her 22 years. The experimental immunotherapy had worked beyond anyone's expectations. Within 3 months, Willow's cancer markers had dropped to undetectable levels, and her doctors were cautiously optimistic about long-term remission. She had moved into the mansion's guest cottage to be close during her recovery, but more importantly, to be part of the family that had embraced them both without reservation. "I wish she could be here," Serafina murmured, touching the silver locket that held the only photograph she possessed of her parents together. "She is here," Aspen announced from the doorway, practically bouncing with excitement in her flower girl dress. "I can feel her in the music, the same way I felt Uncle Edmund when we found his secret songs." Over the past months, Aspen had become obsessed with composing music, spending hours at the piano creating melodies that seemed to channel something deeper than her 8 years should have allowed. Today, she would premiere her latest composition, a piece she claimed came to her in dreams and spoke of love that transcended death. "Are you ready?" Willow asked, offering Serafina the bouquet of white roses and sage that honored both her Cherokee heritage and her new beginning. Serafina nodded, though her hands trembled slightly as they stepped onto the terrace overlooking the gardens. Below them, 50 guests had gathered in wooden chairs arranged in perfect semicircles around the spot where Edmund's mausoleum had once stood. Thaddeus had insisted on having it moved to a private section of the cemetery, replacing it with a memorial garden that celebrated life rather than mourning death. Detective Chin sat in the front row beside Dr. Martinez, both having become unexpected friends during the months of recovery and legal proceedings. The investigation into Magnus' crimes had uncovered decades of corruption, embezzlement, and murder, but it had also revealed the depth of love that Edmund and Ayanna had shared in their brief time together. Caspian Thornfield, the private investigator who had helped expose the truth, served as Thaddeus's best man. His presence had been crucial in building the legal case that officially recognized Serafina as Edmund's daughter and legitimate heir to half the Ravencrest fortune. As the string quartet began playing the processional, Serafina felt a moment of panic. 6 months ago, she had been a struggling nurse with no family except Willow. Now she was about to marry a billionaire, inherit generational wealth, and become stepmother to a child who had already claimed a permanent place in her heart. "Second thoughts," Willow whispered, recognizing her sister's deer-in-headlights expression. "Third and fourth thoughts," Serafina admitted. "What if I'm not cut out for this life? What if I disappoint them?" "Look at him," Willow said simply. Serafina followed her sister's gaze to where Thaddeus stood beneath the rose arbor, hands clasped behind his back and gray eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He wore a charcoal suit that emphasized his broad shoulders, but it was the expression on his face that made her knees weak. Wonder, gratitude, love so profound it seemed to radiate from him like sunlight. All her doubts evaporated. The walk down the garden path felt like floating. Faces smiled at her from both sides, but she only had eyes for the man waiting at the altar. When she reached him, he took her hands and mouthed "beautiful" in a way that made her feel like the only woman in the world. The ceremony was performed by a Cherokee elder Willow had located through careful research into their mother's family. The combination of traditional Cherokee vows and modern promises created something unique and meaningful, honoring both their heritage and their future. "These two souls have found each other across time and tragedy," the elder said, his voice carrying across the garden. "Like the music that brought them together, their love creates harmony from discord, healing from pain, hope from despair." When Thaddeus slipped the platinum band onto her finger, Serafina felt the final piece of herself click into place. She was no longer the lonely nurse who worked 3 jobs to survive. She was Serafina Ravencrest, beloved wife, cherished family member, and guardian of a legacy that stretched back generations. The kiss that sealed their marriage tasted like promises and felt like coming home. As guests moved to the reception area, Aspen took her place at the Steinway grand piano that had been moved into the garden for the occasion. The first notes of her composition filled the evening air, and conversation gradually stopped as people recognized they were hearing something extraordinary. The melody began simply, almost like a lullaby, but gradually grew more complex as themes wove together in ways that seemed impossible for a child to have created. There were echoes of the Cherokee healing songs Serafina had taught her, fragments of classical pieces Edmund had loved, and something entirely new that spoke of joy and family and love that conquered all obstacles. "She's playing their story," Thaddeus murmured, pulling Serafina closer as they swayed together on the improvised dance floor. Edmund and Iona, you and me, all of us finding our way to each other. As if to confirm his words, Aspen began incorporating themes from the sheet music they had decoded months earlier. The secret compositions Edmund had created for Iona became part of a larger symphony that celebrated not just one love story, but the continuation of that love through their daughter and granddaughter. The sun set completely as Aspen played, replaced by strings of lights that turned the garden into something magical. Couples danced while children ran between the tables, and Willow laughed with Caspian over champagne and wedding cake that tasted like happiness. When Aspen finally finished her performance, the applause was thunderous. She took her bow with the confidence of someone who knew she had just shared something precious with the world, then bounded over to where Serafina and Thaddeus were still swaying together. "Did you like it?" she asked, sliding between them and wrapping her arms around both their waists. "It was perfect," Serafina said, lifting the little girl so she could hold her while they danced. "Just like this moment. Just like our family." Thaddeus's arms encircled them both, and for several minutes they moved together in a three-person waltz that felt more natural than breathing. Around them, the reception continued, but Serafina was aware only of the two people in her arms and the overwhelming gratitude that filled her chest. "I have something for you," Thaddeus said eventually, pulling a legal document from his jacket pocket. "Your inheritance papers came through today. Congratulations, Mrs. Ravencrest. You're officially worth about $600 million. The number was so large it felt meaningless. What am I supposed to do with $600 million? Whatever makes you happy. Travel the world, buy an island, start a business." He paused, studying her expression. "Or establish a foundation that combines traditional healing methods with modern medicine." The suggestion made her heart race with possibility. "You've been thinking about this." "I've been thinking about a lot of things. Like how many children could be helped if we created treatment centers that honored both scientific advancement and ancestral wisdom? How many families could be saved if we made such care accessible regardless of their ability to pay?" Serafina felt tears prick her eyes as the vision took shape in her mind. "The Iona Foundation, in honor of your mother, who dedicated her life to healing others." As the evening wound down and guests began departing, the three of them settled on a blanket in the garden where Edmund's mausoleum had once stood. Aspen fell asleep across both their laps while the string quartet played softly in the background, their instruments illuminated by the light of a full moon. "Are you happy?" Thaddeus asked, his fingers combing gently through Serafina's hair. She looked around at the gardens where they had been married, at the mansion that was now their home, at the sleeping child who had become her daughter in every way that mattered. In the distance, she could see Willow helping pack up decorations, healthy and laughing and part of a family that would never let her face anything alone again. "I'm more than happy," she said, leaning into his embrace. "I'm home." The music continued long into the night, weaving Cherokee melodies with classical harmonies, creating something entirely new from the threads of the past. Like their love story, it was complicated and beautiful, born from tragedy, but transformed into something that would heal others for generations to come. In the moonlight, surrounded by roses and the ghosts of those who had loved before them, the Ravencrest family began writing the next chapter of their story together.